Yeah, back with the one you see. Back with the time, don't wanna be. Back with the time, we're just trying to see. We can go outside, but we got the time to be. Back with the one you need. Back with the time to be free. Back with the lovers wanna see. We can go outside, but we gotta be free. Switch it, side, let me beat on side. Switch it, 6 figures now, I'm up.
Welcome back to another episode of Clash of the Titles. I'm Adel.
I'm Kenny.
All right, here we go. All right, so now in this episode of Clash of the Titles, we'll be comparing these two albums. The first one, well, I'm going to go pull out. First one that we have here is OK Computer
All right.
by Radiohead.
I think I've heard of that album.
Yeah, of course. And then the second album will be the 1975's A Brief Inquiry into Online Relationships.
I think I also have that record.
You do too? Oh, why don't you go get it?
Never mind, I thought I had that record. I can't find it.
You thought you had the record.
No, I know I have it. I just don't know where I have it right now.
Somewhere laying around.
Scour for the entire thing. I'll grab it later, I promise.
Go back to your collection and just like scour through it. Like, where are you?
Yeah, I definitely know it's there. It just didn't pop out.
Anyway, we'll be comparing those two albums. So, all right, where should we start with these two albums, Kenny? What do you have in mind?
Ooh, I mean, funnily enough, I just heard OK Computer. I finished listening to the full record today, and gotta say, it's interesting how many alternative rock indie records kind of follow that blueprint. I mean, because it's very much like I thought it was gonna be just a straightforward kind of rock record, but it wasn't. It was like symphonic, it was electronic, it was kind of abstract, had some orchestral elements. It was kind of more like a symphony. And I felt like what's interesting about OK Computer is that I don't know if it was a songwriting record the way I thought it was going to be. It was more like a sensation record. So I feel like a lot of albums, you call them experiences, and sometimes that's kind of cliche. But I do genuinely believe, I think OK Computer was designed to literally be a sensation, audio, immersive experience in a way.
Oh, yeah, totally. With that album, there's definitely a lot of influences on there. It has really more of an experimental kind of influence on there rather than just a straight up alternative rock album, especially from an album and artist of that era, like in the mid 90s where, Radiohead, they're from the UK. A really big kind of like genre of rock coming out of there was Britpop, like, the Oasises, the Pulp, Blur. Yeah. And I feel like this album really kind of pushed Britpop like in the decline in a way, and just like started doing more like experimental kind of rock too. Like, but then again, Radiohead is one of those bands that just kind of go and do things their own way, and they're really just in their own lane, and they really are just artists who kind of create their own genre in a sense too. It's like you can't really classify Radiohead in a specific genre. It's because they mix so many different influences. But yeah, I do agree that from a narrative standpoint, there isn't really like songs that really tell much of a story, tying in all these themes and feelings all together, and like how you react in the certain period and the emotions you evoke during those themes are just tied into it. And if you want to elaborate on some of like the themes that you got out of it too, and see what we could go from there.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest theme I think I got was kind of like alienation, isolation. I think a very prevalent sense of anxiety in society and kind of like fear and confusion. I think the one song that stood out was Paranoid Android. I think it's the second song on the record. And that there's moments where it's a very like heavy, like big, bombastic rock number like you would expect from a band called Radiohead. But then there was like the symphonic elements. It got ambient, it got abstract. It kind of built. It was like slow in the beginning, kind of escalated, and it de-escalated, and then it escalated again. And that's kind of what struck me, is that I don't know if the record is something like you were saying earlier about the band. I don't think you can classify it as one theme or one sound or one style. I think that OK Computer is kind of Radiohead's Rorschach test. Anybody kind of can find anything from it. And I think that the record was designed to kind of pull them. And like you were saying about Britpop, I think it was very much veering past that territory. I really don't see any Britpop resemblance whatsoever in that album at all. I think it was more or less just their most experimental, yet somehow I feel like it's also one of the more personal records they've done. Something about it feels personal, even though it's not quite linear in a way.
Yeah, totally agree with all that stuff. Like, like you mentioned Paranoid Android, and yeah, that song has like different movements and has different moods in each section that you progress throughout the song. There's themes of like paranoia going on in there and anxiety. I think I read something about that song in particular where in one of like the verses where Tom York basically got influenced from being in bars in Los Angeles and just kind of being despising like the whole environment of people being there because they were like usually high and really drunk. There's something I read specifically where he said that there was this one woman who got so mad that a drink was spilt on her, and that kind of influenced the kicking, screaming Gucci little piggy line in
Yeah,
particular from my
that line's good,
research.
yeah.
Yeah, so an embodiment of lifestyle there and the materialism that just annoys people like Tom York, I guess, in particular. But yeah, it's really a song that kind of just intensifies throughout and tones down and just explodes with that whole paranoid and anxiety that you would feel from basically the world around you as if the world's caving in if you go through anxiety and all that stuff.
Yeah. What fascinated me the most is that how the record always kind of seems to shift just when you think you figured out the tone. Because then it goes into like subterranean, homesick alien, which kind of builds off the whole paranoia, isolation. He's from the UK, so there's a lot of outsider perspective and commentary. I think that's very much predominant through a lot of the record. But then there's songs that kind of end up just being almost abstract statements that are more musical than lyrical. Like you have exit music for a film, which isn't really lyrical heavy, but it has a lot of mood and atmosphere and orchestral and almost feels appropriately cinematic, but there's not really a straightaway meaning, but there's a lot of like textures to it. And then you kind of even see that for like that song Fitter Happier, which isn't really quote unquote a song, but the audio is kind of a commentary on, stimulation and the media and all these illusions of, being productive and being a part of society. So I feel like the record is always kind of constantly pushing towards a new boundary. Or I think in all honesty, I think it's Radiohead expanding their musical palette, but also being, I think, as adventurous as they've been kind of claiming to be, in that there's no ground for really not exploring here. So it's a lot going on for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely. You like to elaborate and touch more upon those songs that you mentioned. Fitter Happier, I feel like is more kind of like an interlude in a way, in a sense, because you have that robot narrating all these things. And from what I got from that interlude, basically, is just the narrator just talking about how an ideal society would operate, basically. But we know that society doesn't operate ideally, on a script. It's so unpredictable with things. So it's kind of a narrative as if like, oh, this is how society should be, when it really isn't. And then also, yeah, you mentioned about exit music for a film. From the research I did, was that apparently that song was supposed to be made for the Romeo and Juliet movie that had Leonardo DiCaprio in there. That song, like they did have a song that was on that soundtrack, Talk Show Host. That song had the themes that, would tie in with Romeo and Juliet, about like, how two lovers basically would just want to escape and be freed from everything and run away from all the troubles of the world and be together and stuff. So it has a lot of kind of Romeo and Juliet, lovers running away and trying to run away from all the problems of like fighting families, like those kind of themes tied into that song. Those songs in particular really do tie in a lot of the themes of the album, how society operates and the problems with society and the isolation that people could feel in a world and living in a society that's like very non-traditional and goes against the grain of things. And yeah, I could agree that there are a lot of dystopian, apocalyptic kind of like themes and moods behind the songs on this album too. So,
oh, for sure,
there's impending doom really coming your way in a sense. So,
I mean, perfect for right now.
Yeah,
a little
exactly.
too perfect. One of the things that I think really struck me, and I mean, I heard so much about this record for years, and I really, for some weird reason, I had never fully delved into it the way a lot of people had, and doing research like you did and hearing it fully for the first time, quite fresh. There seems to be a sense of, in each song, like you would kind of go into the apocalyptic theme, it's urgent, but in a subtle manner. Like there's clearly he's chronicling a very angst and dread-ridden society, but he's not doing it in a manner that feels over the top or dramatic or extreme. He's almost kind of doing it understated, and I think that almost makes it more impactful. Like you'll get a song like Karma Police, and it's kind of talking about somebody who's in distress and whose mental health is deteriorating and being ostracized. You know, it could have really been like a bombastic, angry, raw song, but it's kind of serenely beautiful. And that almost makes some of the moments stand out as more tragic. I think that the approach subverts the themes. And I think that that's why I think it's so striking as a listen, because if it had just gone in and been aggressive and angry and been we're all doomed, I think that, you know, would have probably been a more cliche, conventional record. But I think it's so original and imaginative because it's really an elegant, beautiful record with some of the darkest themes I think I've ever heard.
Yeah, that's really good that you mentioned that, because there are so many songs on here that sound so pleasant and upbeat in a way, but when you listen to the lyrics, it's really dark lyrics, very
definitely
very nihilistic kind of views on things. Like, yeah, you did mention Karma Police, which is like the whole lyrical content behind it is as someone under stress, having karma basically hit people, you know, people who've done you wrong, and just like you're kind of hoping in the back of your mind, like, oh, I hope karma hits them, like, you know, like that. And then there are other songs down in here that are like kind of pleasant. In particular, one of my favorite songs on the album, No Surprises, which is like a lullaby in a way. Yeah, it has that very heavy glockenspiel in the song, very calm and soothing, but it's really a song about how someone feels like giving up in life, really, and just carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders and not having the power and strength to do that anymore. A song like that is a perfect example of that. Another song that's also one of my favorites is the song Let Down, which is basically very springy, like just like a song about how life like brings you down and you're trying to achieve these dreams, this idealistic life, and trying to achieve dreams, but then in reality, if you don't meet those dreams, it seems like a failure, or some of those dreams are unattainable in a way. The sad reality and harsh reality of things like that. Those are like two songs in particular that do fit in with that whole idea, the dark themed songs that somewhat feel very uplifting in a way, which is a very weird way to go about making a song, but it really stands out to people, like those kind of songs.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is that I heard a bit of Radiohead discography over the years. I've obviously, given having heard this record for the first time fully, I plan on kind of maybe delving deeper a bit. But I mean, from hearing where they would go next, I mean, you see Kid A, you know, talking about the glockenspiel and like the ambient elements in the song, like No Surprises. A lot of that element ended up becoming the foundation for Kid A. That whole kind of poppy approach with darker themes is kind of the catalyst for In Rainbows. So I think, interestingly, and this is a point we'll probably delve into more when we talk about Brief Inquiry, I think it's the sound of a band launching themselves into a new foundation, because up before this, Radiohead wasn't this band on the bends and really wasn't this kind of band on Pablo Honey. They were before this kind of more of a traditional but artier alt rock band. And this is the first record where I really seem like they're visionaries, where they're experimentalists, where they're conceptualists, where they're kind of auteurs of their own sound. So I think that because of that, some of the songs and songs like No Surprises and songs like Let Down, you know, they could have been simpler songs on another record. But here I think they're two of the strongest songs on the record, because I think that they're A, the most personal, and I think that B, they kind of crystallize the Radiohead approach, and the approach that a lot of their best songs and best albums going forward would implement, almost to a point where they become a formula.
Oh yeah, definitely. I would say like OK Computer, the first steps in Radiohead, like progressing with their sound and being more experimental with their sounds. Because, you know, the album after this was Kid A, which is like a complete 180 in sound. Totally experimental, using different instruments. Same thing that goes with Amnesiac, which is basically like a B-side kind of album to Kid A, where it's like very experimental. There's like a lot of like jazz influences on that album too. OK Computer really pushed them into that direction of more of like an art rock, experimental rock kind of genre, really.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And then when you look at a 1975 record, similarities are obviously they're very different from a sonic standpoint. And I think lyrically they have different vantage points, but I think the one underlying connection between the two is that both records represent a turning point for these bands, right? I mean, before these records, you know, Radiohead were a popular act, 1975 were a mainstream popular act, but with these records, I think that they decided to forge ahead and emphasize and go against more commercial aspects and kind of go more into a more art defined, more thematic approach where they're kind of making music to explore the themes they want to do and kind of take risks, explore a lot of territory that was hinted at in other records, but they didn't fully explore into. So I think that's fascinating that both artists made pretty giant leaps in their sound and style and I think approach with these records.
That's true. Yeah, I agree with that. Each of these bands' third album is basically the point where they just take a leap into a new direction. I feel like both of these albums too kind of tie in some very similar themes where it's just basically a narrative and social commentary on society in a way, and just their views and interpretations of how people in their each respective generations of society during those times, OK Computer being made in the 90s and then Brief Inquiry just being made like in 2018. So all the stuff, how society operates within 2018, of course, is going to be different than the 90s, like 97. Yeah, 1997. Yeah. There's some recurring themes that always happen like within society, or not themes, I would say, but like reoccurring events and ways of going about life that are just persistent 20 something years later. The bad things in society that we try to move forward towards, and or how we just interact with one another. And both of those albums really take those perspectives into mind. I feel OK Computer is more of like an individual perspective, as if you were isolated and going through paranoia. Brief Inquiry kind of goes more along the lines of how we encounter relationships with others, mostly in particular.
Definitely. Yeah. Brief Inquiry is interesting in that I think it's very similar to OK Computer, but also some of an opposite, where like you were saying with OK Computer, it's more about an individual's kind of interior experience of their connection to society. And Brief Inquiry is more about the way we interact with society and how we force those connections and how those connections are kind of shifted by personal issues. One of the tracks I think kind of really symbolizes all of that is I think Love It If We Made It. It's this huge, crazy arena-sized number. And it's half the song is just tweets and news information from 2018, how it's trending. And it's all about how these issues are affecting our communication, our perception, our reality. But it's also a vaguely optimistic song about, hey, despite all this, we can still make it. We can still connect and grow and be hopeful. And I think it's a counterpoint to OK Computer, which doesn't really have much optimism or hope in all honesty. Yeah. But I think Brief Inquiry does seem to have a more of a motivation of gaining that. So it's interesting how those two can contrast.
Yeah, that's perfect that you mentioned that song, because it perfectly exemplifies the themes where it's like, it's just a big social commentary and the perspective on what's going on in society, certain issues that have been hot topics within the past few years, like police brutality, instability politically with the president that we had. And also there was something about like kneeling during the national anthem, and specifically in sports, drug issues, drug pandemics that's going on.
Racial
and it
violence.
just a whole social narrative of all the things that are just exploding during this time and that people are very vocal about and want to serve justice to. And then, it just kind of just exemplifies how our modern times, which are supposed to be progressive, like literally are failing us. Like literally the lyric is modernity has failed us. Things are failing, but then like I agree, it's kind of like an optimistic step in the right direction. Hey, we'll make it out of this, but it's gonna be tough, really. So
yeah. I mean, that's a relevant message now, and I think that's true. That I think that track kind of symbolizes the entire record's mission statement. Because there's a lot of songs on Brief Inquiry that kind of incorporate those themes in a less raw manner. Like you'll get the song like It's Not Living If It's Not With You, which is a song about addiction, and a song about trying to get better, and a song about trying to break that cycle. I mean, also like Radiohead, OK Computer, juxtapose it against like a really poppy kind of dance number, but in reality it's not a song about
it's a very dark song, really. It's very upbeat and something dancey. You're right. It's Not Living If It's Not With You is really about just a drug addiction.
Interesting. Now, one other song that I think really also encapsulates a lot of the records, like anxiety and angst and kind of like hope for the future, is that song I Like America and America Likes Me. It's a song that I think really caps into a feeling of like being afraid of dying, afraid of violence, afraid of like a society to tear. And that song really, I think, takes a very urgent approach. Yeah. Now, unlike OK Computer, where it's a little bit more measured, this song is like very much like we're afraid, if it's violence, we're scared of dying. But it's also, there's a little bit of hope in the fact that it's like, there is a way to prevent that, but only if we let it. And I think a lot of brief inquiry is about trying to maintain that, as opposed to I think OK Computer is more just a slow chronicle of a mental state that is withdrawn from the world.
That's true. I'll agree with that. Yeah. OK Computer kind of is like someone feeling all that paranoia and anxiety and slowly eating them up in a way, and how they interact with society, or how they be a member of society while you go through all of that stuff, how they fit in a way, or how they try to fit in specifically, and how they manage to go about themselves feeling those emotions and that state of mind. Brief inquiry has more a positive kind of spin in a way. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of things that we go through in society, where it's with relationships with people, or how the world events impact us, has like more of like a struggle, how you go through that. But there's something very optimistic at the end of those songs on Brief Inquiry that ties everything together.
Yeah, I think so. I think Brief Inquiry feels like a record that I think has a bit more of a structured narrative. I think you see that in like the finale track, I Always Want to Die Sometimes. There's a song about the struggles of everyday life, but it's also about fighting to live another day. You see that in the song, Surrounded by Heads and Bodies, a song about kind of being disconnected and being alone and kind of figuring things out. And even a song like Sincerity is Scary, a song about, the fear of communicating and being in a relationship and being honest about that, and the struggles about that. I think it's a more personal record and much more humanistic.
But
I think that both records do find a way to kind of chronicle human experience, but do so using different canvases. But it's interesting how both of them, in a lot of ways, are chronicling some similar things from very different viewpoints.
Exactly. It's good that you mentioned about like Sincerity is Scary. A bunch of songs on Brief Inquiry talk about like relationship dynamics of today, and how people our age really go about pursuing relationships, and how we interact with people. Really, Sincerity is Scary is a song about how, if you're your true original self, basically, if you present yourself to someone just being yourself, there's kind of like a fear and anxiety behind it, because you don't want to show off too much of yourself. So it's kind of like you want to put up like some facade really to gear towards this person. We do a lot of things out of fear. You're kind of compromising yourself if you're not your original self in a way. So Sincerity is Scary is kind of like one of those kind of things, how we kind of put up a front for people just to see this version of them that they want to see, but you're not being your actual self. Song like Be My Mistake is basically about, from what I saw, about, hookups and infidelity, basically. There's that one lyric in particular is like, just wait and I'll give you a sign. So it's like, come on up when the time is right and stuff like that. Don't wait outside my hotel waiting for me. Just give them a sign to come up. It's also a song that's just like about people who just want attention and wants like instant satisfaction, whether it's having companionship or just having like a one night stand, those kind of things. Like people want to fulfill their needs.
That's a very valid point.
Exactly. And then the song Two Time, which is about also, relationship dynamics when it comes to like social media, phones and technology and stuff, and how like we go about social media and interacting with people.
It's fascinating because that's the summer song I was going to bring up. That's a very fun, tropical, breezy pop number, but the whole song is about, like you were saying, about infidelities and miscommunication and unfaithfulness and the social media gaze of we're always looking for something and we're always wishing we had that person. And the record's interesting, Brief Inquiry, in that I feel like it taps into a lot of basic desires. And I think that's the one thing that I think makes it a little distinctive compared to OK Computer, is that OK Computer is more about a broad theme about society in general and connection and isolation, how one person can kind of suffer in that vacuum and how that vacuum is becoming all too encompassing. And how technology kind of is advancing that. But Brief Inquiry is using technology as a springboard, but it's not really a record about technology and more about the emotions behind our interactions. I think even that interlude, The Man Who Married a Robot, is about that. How he's it's also like a companion to Fit or Happier, about a man who's in relationship with the internet is making up for a lack of a connection or a voice. It's very poetic, but also tragic. And I think it kind of encapsulates a lot of themes and observations that both records, I think, we're striving to make.
Exactly. Yeah. OK Computer has more of like an isolationist kind of theme, like how someone feels so isolated. I feel like Brief Inquiry is the opposite, where someone wants to seek a relationship and companionship with people. And then, like you mentioned, the Man Who Married a Robot interlude song is basically the most isolating song on the album, because that's the song in particular that really focuses on someone feeling isolated and just has really the internet as their quote unquote friend. And yeah, how that goes about and how someone goes about their time just always on the internet. And I know there was like some lyrics in that song where it's like, oh, we went everywhere, like me and the friend went everywhere. And it's kind of like, yeah, that's technically what society is right now, because like you could get the internet on your phone just like that, and you literally take the internet everywhere you go, even to areas where that don't have an internet connection. It's like it's there whenever it's made available. Like they were talking about like, oh, we went to the countryside, we did this, and we went here, we went there, we went on trains. And it's like, yeah, like this is literally, if you're on a train or going somewhere, or you're literally walking through a city, you got to use the internet right from your phone, really.
Pretty much.
You know, we're always on the internet, we're always connected and stuff. But yeah, that song, of course, it ends like in a bad way, where it's like the guy dies and he's still all alone, and he didn't really foster or establish any meaningful human interactions or relationships with people. But despite that, that's where I think that OK Computer and Brief Inquiry differ in the ways, because like I said, Brief Inquiry is more seeking companionship, and OK Computer is more someone feeling isolated from the world.
Yeah, right on. I think actually both the final tracks on each record kind of tip off the journeys and the arcs. Like if you look at the last track on OK Computer, it's called The Tourist. So a tourist typically is somebody who is out of state, not from the area, observing things, but not really a part of things. And I think that's Tom York's lyrical character in OK Computer, is a character who isn't really a part of society, isn't whole, doesn't feel really at all connected or at all integrated into the society, but is viewing it from the outside in, and is kind of slowly deteriorating. And if you look at I Always Want to Die Sometimes, that's a feeling of the anxiety and the confusion on Brief Inquiry about how to live in society and how to communicate and how to interact.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the track is I Always Want to Die Sometimes, but that feeling that the feeling is fleeting, and that's all about trying to get past that feeling. So I think both of them have very distinctive arcs. But I have to say, I think from a musical standpoint, both of them, I think, are remarkably cohesive, take a lot of risks, are very imaginative, and very dynamic, too. There's really no one or two songs on each record that sound fully like the other, in a sense.
That's true, yeah. There aren't really two or three multiple songs that really sound the same. They may sound very similar, but they blend well with one another. Like some songs are more hard-hitting, some are more mellow in a way, or toned down in a sense. Some are upbeat, some are more like serious, some are more explosive in a way. I feel like there are a lot of different songs on both albums that are like that. I do believe that both of the closers really tie in those themes together. Like, yeah, you said for OK Computer, the tourist is kind of like someone being a tourist somewhere, not really stopping to recognize and realize the beauty behind whatever city or place they're visiting. It's kind of like they're so focused on like, I got to do this and that, they don't really stop and realize and take a look around, like missing out on real life experience of visiting a city. Being a tourist is like supposed to be a beautiful thing, but there are people who are like so in their minds about, I got to do this, I got to do that, kind of like an autopilot in a way of doing what they need to see in the cities and places they visit. So it's kind of like they don't really take the time to stop and breathe in and witness where they're visiting. Always Want to Die Sometimes, I feel like with that song, it's kind of just like a representation of how people could feel in like trying times, really. Like if things get so stressful and the weight of the world just weighs you down and you just feel like, oh, I just want to die right now. It's like, I can't take this. Even though saying that like I want to die sometimes, it's kind of very optimistic in a way.
Yeah, and
I want to say
it's a very simple way for sure.
Yeah, because it's like, yeah, it may be so dark, like you want to die, but it's sometimes. So it's kind of like the idea where it's like hanging in the air, like I really don't feel like dying. I'm just saying that because I'm so stressed out from the world of what's going on. It's like, hey, tomorrow's the next day. Take it one day at a time. And tomorrow's a new day and something to look forward to, really. So
very true, very true.
Yeah.
So man, there's a lot of really cool points you brought about this record. I was gonna kind of segue into, in terms of which record you feel kind of was more of an experience for you, or you think which one kind of had more of a personal resonance. Which one would you kind of say you leaning towards? Because both of these records are held in high regard, but obviously OK Computer kind of is like a testament or a mecca And Brief Inquiry, although it's newer, I think is still considered very much a widely kind of impactful commentary.
Yeah, I feel like maybe Brief Inquiry, like I felt more of a resonance with that because it just like I said, tackles like a lot of issues that, we from our age group really go through, especially the whole technology aspect that ties in with how we go about relationships. I think I remember when I first heard OK Computer, which was like back in like 2007, I believe was the first time I heard that album. And I didn't really fully understand the themes behind that. I just took it as like, oh, Radiohead. I always wanted to hear their music. So I was put on OK Computer and I was like, whoa, this music is something I've never really heard of before at the time.
Absolutely.
So like, I didn't really take it, the whole themes behind it until like maybe recent years, like, re-listening to Radiohead albums and thinking like, okay, this is kind of like an album that talks about how you feel so isolated and alone and all the problems in society, even though it's kind of a small aspect, but like how like technology really will take over in a sense, or how it plays a role in how we interact with people. Like it's like it's an album that really predicted the future in a way, really, because 97, it's like, yeah, the internet is booming. Really, we don't really know the power of the internet back then, but I felt like Radiohead had an idea of like how it's going to be. It's like, oh, the internet is really going to take over heading into the millennium in the future. That sense, like, yeah, I feel like Brief Inquiry I could relate to more, but OK Computer, it still feels relevant too because of the way that how our society operates and how technology plays that impact into our daily lives and how we interact with people.
Yeah, for sure. I would say I personally I'm also a very big 1975 fan. So for me, that record I think was a big progressor for them, and I think very much a solidifier of their talents and their perspectives, and really was a record that I felt was very humanistic, at times optimistic, but also very much of a very penetrating observation of today's society and technology and our relationships to it. But hearing OK Computer very recently for the first time, I mean, it's like you said, I mean, it really predicted social media, technology, the internet boom, and talked about alienation. I mean, all the social anxiety and the way that culture really has a shift in how like people have kind of assimilated into like a media saturated, artifice driven kind of lifestyle. And I think the fact that in 1997 it was so forward thinking and progressive in the musical territory and the song construction and the ideas. I mean, it really is a game changer, whether or not you love the record or not. It's OK Computer does really have, I think, a really social, cultural document. And I think Brief Inquiry, similar enough, is a record that I think in time will be viewed the same way. Albeit, obviously, we're doing different things, but I think for both artists, they managed to kind of look at the surroundings and encapsulate them and also move forward in a lot of ways. So I guess the one question we're going down to is, I guess, as our title suggests, it's which record, if we're going to put them in the ring, who's coming out?
Okay. Choosing between those two. I love both albums. They're really great. I feel objectively, I think Brief Inquiry is the 1975's best album. 100%. Even though my personal favorite is the second one. I really can't say all the words in that because it's so long. All I know is
when
called,
you sleep.
I like it when you sleep because exactly. I like it when you sleep. That's my personal favorite.
Love that record.
With Radiohead, I would say OK Computer is like my second favorite album by them. With that being said, I feel like I'm going to choose OK Computer because bands don't really make music like that, really. It's just very symphonic, very experimental, very innovative in its time. And, there aren't really bands that really make music like that in general, just thinking outside the box of their genres and just the moods you feel too. It's really like a very big listening experience where it just takes you on like a journey of like how you feel. You tune in to your own emotions in a way, and like the feelings you get if you're isolated, suffer from anxiety and paranoia. It really digs up those emotions when you listen to an album like that, and it helps you reflect more on like, damn, this is really how it would be if you felt this way within society. So yeah, I would just say from that standpoint, musically and just how you feel, I feel like a bigger resonance with OK Computer?
Yeah, I mean, hearing it very recently, I could see from an objective standpoint, OK Computer has stood the test of time. I mean, a tremendous musical achievement, really, I think, paved the way for electronic rock, art rock, experimental indie alternative. And like you said, a lot of bands don't make music like it. I mean, it's incredibly diverse, experimental. I think subverts a lot of strong structure, convention, the arrangements, the mixtures of classical, symphonic, abstract elements, but also very much a strong indie alt rock momentum going through it. So I think from an objective standpoint, OK Computer is very much the maybe one could argue the more culturally historic and richer document. But I'm gonna have to say from a personal standpoint, and like you, I'm a huge 1975 fan. I love the second record, was the one that introduced me to them and I thought was so personal. But I have to say, I think Brief Inquiry is 1975's most accomplished, singular, and cohesive record. And I think for me, on a personal level, I think Brief Inquiry is more relatable, more humanistic, and I think at times a tad bit more accessible. But I think both records, I think, do a tremendous amount musically. I think they're both genuine artistic statements. And I think for both of the band's discography, I think are the key albums that truly establish that these are dynamic, unique talents that I think are going to stand the test of time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. Definitely, like we mentioned before, like those respective third albums from both of their bands is like a turning point, really, in the direction of sound, just pushing them to greater horizons, really.
I would agree.
As we wrap this up, are there any final thoughts that you have on both of these records?
Ooh, we've got so many good ones. I would say the one thing that fascinated me about OK Computer and fascinated me about Brief Inquiry is that they're both the band's third records, but yet somehow, some way, it almost feels like we're eating the band for the first time. But they really assume, I think, a unique new sense of identity. Like with 1975, the first two records were great. I love them, but they were, I think, a little more at times carefree and more catchy and more about, I think, making songs that just wanted you to get up and move. Whereas Brief Inquiry, it almost seemed like they were really turning inward, getting a lot more personal and confessional. I think really going for more complex subject matter and complex song structures, but also still kind of honoring those roots and progressing. And with Radiohead, it almost seemed like on that record, they were kind of, going away from the more melancholy anthems and the indie rock kind of circuit they were kind of previously navigating, and really going for more of like ambience and, subverting song structure. And Tom York was really, becoming more of an impressionistic conceptualist as opposed to just another singer-songwriter. So both records, I think, are almost like a progression of the bands, but also like a reinvention that I think allowed them to really branch off and be who they really wanted to be. Not that they weren't who they wanted to be the first two records, but there's a noticeable, I think, artistry and sophistication on these records that, not that it wasn't there on the first two, but I think is almost kind of a new discovery for a lot of the artists.
Exactly. Yeah, I actually agree with that take in that perspective, because it feels like you're kind of being reintroduced to a band, an artist that's being reborn in a way, and you just hear this new different sound and perspectives from it. So totally agree with that, with both Radiohead and 1975.
There we go. Both highly recommended third albums on our third episode.
On the third episode, 333, all these things basically. All right, well, I think that pretty much sums it all up. Thank you guys for taking a listen and watching this video and our takes on both OK Computer by Radiohead and Brief Inquiry into Online Relationships by 1975. If you guys like both of these albums and both of these artists, just comment below on what you like about the albums, what your favorite songs, what you love about the artists, and how you felt about listening to these albums. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to this channel, and we'll be back with more episodes. And anything else left to say, Kenny?
I think that Bible covers it, man. Another great episode. And for anyone who hasn't heard these records, go check them out. They're both excellent. Follow Adel at Podeki on YouTube and Chakin Pharaoh on Instagram.
And then follow Kenny at Kenny from the Block on Instagram, or K94 Photography for his photography page. And thank you guys for taking the time to watch this again, and we will see you guys later.
Sounds good, guys. Thank you.
Take care.